We are nearing the completion of this Firebird's big block makeover and finally running up against one of the biggest roadblocks for every project: wiring. This car has seen a lot of changes over the years, and most of them involved some modification or addition to the engine bay wiring harness, which has left it in quite a state. We'll start off by unhooking just about every component and removing as much of the magical spaghetti as possible because almost all of it is going to be replaced. Even the factory loom is going under the knife to remove unnecessary noodles.
This is the cruise control wire. This must be offering resistance or something? This is 15 or 20 feet of wire.
We'll be trimming that down and pulling it through the firewall, leaving a grommet that will come in handy later on. On the other side of that steel sheet, the changes are going to be far less aggressive, but there is still cleanup to do and we'll make some repairs to the existing wiring while we're here.
Now that the majority of the wiring is out of the engine bay, in fact almost all of it is, we have a relatively blank slate to start from. Most of the body harness wiring is going to stay untouched. Everything else that used to go to the engine is going to be modified.
We're not going to jump directly into remaking the engine bay harness though, because there are a few tasks to work through first.
We are going to remove this block-off plate to install an AC delete heater box. From the factory, this was an AC-equipped car, and back when I bought it, it had some of the equipment still in it. But years ago, when I was tidying up engine bay stuff and trying to fit headers, I was having some issues and just removed the entire box,
which made a lot of space to work in at the cost of leaving holes in the firewall that needed to be covered up. However, the biggest price to pay for removing the entire blower motor assembly was visibility. I never cared for driving this car in the rain, even before cutting a big hole in the hood, but sometimes you don't have a choice, and without a blower motor, the windshield has a very strong desire to fog up. I'd have to manually wipe the inside of the windshield and or roll the windows down, getting drenched by the rain and not having a great time. So, while this car is likely to never have AC again, I would really like to be able to install a blower motor to make those moments less miserable.
This is a fiberglass box. There are some ABS ones out there. I'm hardly a fiberglass expert, but it's almost a 1/4 inch thick and feels pretty solid. Of course, just putting this box in there doesn't really give us much of anything. We need a blower motor. Why not use the old one? First is that it feels a little bit like a pepper grinder. And secondly, because the cage is too tall to fit in the other unit. I went and got this guy, which is for a non-AC car and has a significantly shorter cage.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful.
We'll also need a resistor. This guy is a model for air-conditioned cars,
which we're sticking with because it'll plug right into the existing wires and connector. For comparison, here's a resistor pack for a non-AC vehicle, and
you can see it's got one less terminal, one less coil. Essentially, this has a low and a medium, while the AC one also has a high. You're supposed to run a cooling tube. This is theoretically to help cool the motor. I've heard very mixed things about this. We're not going to use it. If I burn out a motor, we can come back and add it. Something worth mentioning, why did I go buy a new box instead of modifying this one? Well, I tried that. I clearly started cutting this apart, and it just was a mess. I'm sure that given enough time and energy, I could cobble together some horrifying thing, but we all have our limits, and mine would be doing that. I've heard some mixed things about how these boxes fit. This one is distinctive particularly because it has a skinny neck here. This is because the inlet and outlet for the heater core go above and below it, and on the factory one and some of the aftermarket ones, one of the heater core lines just passes straight through it.
In order to find out how well it's going to fit, we're going to have to be able to see what we're doing, which means the inner fender has to come out. There are bolts holding it to the body at the rear, the outer fender along the wheel arch and upper edge, the battery tray, and this lower cover plate at the front. With all of that removed, the inner fender, with a little help to clear the lip of the outer fender, is fully free to be extracted from the wheel well. After an initial test fit gives some degree of confidence that the delete box is going to fit, we'll remove the block-off plate for the air outlet.
Here we see the blend door, which controls how much of the air goes through the heater core and how much just goes through the ducting without extra heat being added.
In this car, it's controlled via a simple cable connection to this lever on the dash. Next, the plate for the blower inlet will need to come off as well. both of these block-offs were sealed to the firewall with plain old RTV. And now that we can do a more proper test fit, it's clear that we've got a fair amount of work ahead of us. We'll start off by drilling these mounting stud locations, filing them when the holes don't line up, drilling in a totally different spot when they still don't, filing, drilling, and then repeat that process for all of the mounting features. Then, of course, we'll have to take chunks out here and there to clearance the box for a variety of brackets, bends, and screws, until it can finally sit flat against the firewall. Or at least as close to flat as we're going to get. Next, we're going to need to cut out the hole for the blower motor, which should be at least 5 3/4 of an inch across. I don't have a hole saw that big, but I do have this fly cutter and a strong desire to avoid using the jigsaw, so here we go. Okay, yeah, that's terrifying, but it does kinda seem to be working. After making it about as deep as the cutter bevel would allow, we'll flip the box over and start from the inside. Though, as it turns out, this area was thicker than expected and I couldn't get it to break through. By this point, my wrists and the cutter were pretty much done for, so it's time for the jigsaw to finish what we started. At least the fly cutter left us a nice round pattern to follow, if nothing else.
I guess I should have just started with the dang jigsaw. Of course, we're not done with the box just yet. We do need to make another hole in it.
Fortunately for this one, we can just use a 1 3/4 inch hole saw, and it isn't long before we have that knocked out. Now that the resistor pack has a home, we can pre-drill for its 2 mounting screws as well as the 5 for the motor. Then we'll hose the whole thing down and give it a coat of bed liner to complete the look and help seal all of the fibers. Once that's dry, we're finally ready to assemble everything, so we'll use our TV to encircle the blower motor and resistor with a bead of silicone that we'll let set up for about 15 minutes until it's no longer tacky on the outer surface. This will help it fill the larger gaps and reduce the mess the next time the assembly has to come apart. We'll use stainless self-tappers to mount the motor to the box and reuse the ground terminal from the old motor after sanding off some of the paint underneath to ensure a good electrical connection.
I don't see any RTV on it, so we should be good.
The resistor pack will be installed to the box in the same way, and it's time for what is likely the longest bead of RTV I have ever run. After some time for the sealer to skin over, we'll hang the box off of the firewall and start putting in fasteners. Some lined up with factory holes and others needed to be drilled.
2 or 3 times when tightening, I heard some crackling, which I hope was just settling. I do want to just hook the blower motor straight to the battery again and see if we can feel or hear any air leaks around here.
But when testing the motor, the wire threw a big spark and got real hot real fast.
There's no way it's jammed against that edge, is there? Oh my god. I think the cage on the motor is pressed up against that lip that the air flows through.
Which means the motor gets to come back out. It definitely couldn't spin when mounted to the box, so we'll have to knock down some of the raised edge of the firewall cutout to make room for the cage. Ideally, this opening would have been centered to the motor and this wouldn't have been a problem, but we're doing the best we can with the less than ideal parts we have. After a successful test fit,
I can hear a lot of stuff flying around in there.
We'll paint the mangled firewall, replace the RTV on the motor, and stick it back onto the delete box, hopefully for good this time.
Music to my ears.
After feeling around for air leaks, I found that this edge of the box was making poor contact, but it's nothing that some additional RTV and a pair of helper screws couldn't fix. To finish things up, we'll have to restore the factory wiring that I had previously chopped up. I did still have the functional original blower motor relay, but it was showing its age, so I figured that a replacement wouldn't hurt. I couldn't find an exact match, but this one was listed as fitting the car, and other than the mounting bracket, looked pretty similar. Of course, I missed the fact that the circuit diagram printed on the housing is totally different from the relay's functionality on the car, and went ahead with using it. We'll also be adding this power junction that will be shared by the blower motor and several other systems as we move forward. Once we reconnect all the wires for the relay, resistor, and motor, tidying those up as we go, we're left with this as the finished product. Despite the blower wiring being mostly self-contained, we'll wait until all of the body side components are reattached to test it, so for now the last step is reinstalling the inner fender. It wasn't a small amount of work to reinstate air circulation into this car's repertoire, but it made sense to do it now, and I'm confident it will be worth it later on. For a sneak preview, let's skip ahead a bit until the rest of the car has been wired and the blower motor setup can be tested for real. And the initial results are not promising because it wasn't working at all. But I noticed when unplugging the relay it wasn't clicking, so I grabbed the old relay. And what do you know, it works. The relays may use the same connector, but they do not share functionality. It was fortunate that the mistake resulted in an open circuit and not a short, whether that was by design or sheer luck. But even with the motor now running, the air circulation within the car is a bit lacking. I mean, I do feel some airflow, particularly through this vent under the steering wheel, but I think all the air is escaping somewhere under there. You can probably see those cobwebs dance pretty good when I turn it up. On medium and higher, I do actually feel air movement, so I mean, it's better than nothing. Somewhere down the line, I'm gonna have to dig in and figure out where the air is escaping from. But for now, at least we have a base to build upon and one last thing on the to-do list. This is the only way it fits on the drill press, but it does. I'm not sure whether I'm excited or terrified by that concept. It's good when the blade is already touching the workpiece when you turn it on. Okay, no. That's way too sketchy.